the Republic built its army from one genetic template. Millions of soldiers came from the same source, and they looked the same and trained the same way. However, their jobs were not the same. The Clone Wars sent troopers to different roles across the galaxy, and some jobs gave them a fair chance, while others did not. After examining both canon and legend sources, we found that not all clone assignments were created equal, and some were designed to break the men who filled them. As seen throughout the Clone Wars, Coruscant was the capital of the Republic, where the Senate building, the Jedi Temple, and government offices all needed guards. Troopers in these areas handled crowd control, building security, and watch for spies. This job seemed safer than fighting on the front lines because troopers here did not face droid armies. Instead, they watched doors and walked the same routes every day, checking identification and standing at posts for hours without anything happening. But safety came with its own cost. The problem was not the danger, it was the purpose. These troopers had no real power and followed rules made by politicians who never served in combat. When something went wrong, it became a political scandal, and the troopers took the blame for things they could not control. A breach in security was not seen as a military failure, but as a political disaster. At the same time, they knew their brothers were fighting across the galaxy. They stayed safe while others faced real battles, and this created guilt, even though they had no choice in their assignment. Every day they heard reports of battles happening far away, and every day they stood at their posts doing nothing that felt meaningful. The job kept them alive, but it gave them nothing to feel proud of. It was boring, thankless work with constant stress. The troopers guarding the Jedi Temple had an extra burden because they protected a building they would never enter and guarded people they would never meet. The Jedi walked past them without notice, making the assignment symbolic rather than real. Coruscant guards had it rough in their own way, but some troopers had it worse because they worked trapped inside metal walls where one enemy hit meant instant death. Venator-class Star Destroyers formed the backbone of the Republic fleet, appearing in both Revenge of the Sith and the Clone Wars. But these massive warships needed constant care. Troopers assigned to damage control worked deep inside these ships, where they watched reactors, fixed hull damage, and fought fires during battle. And that is exactly what made this job so dangerous. Their location made them vulnerable. When enemy fire hit a ship, these troopers often lost their lives first because hull breaches pulled them into space, reactor problems exposed them to harmful energy, and fires spread faster than they could escape. These dangers happened without warning during any battle. Because of this, they had no way out during major damage because escape pods sat on the outer decks, leaving the troopers inside the ship with nowhere to go. And when a ship took critical hits, the interior became a death trap. These soldiers also wore lighter gear than ground troops because their equipment was made for repair work, not survival in combat. So they had no heavy armor and no combat weapons. The work was hard even during peaceful times because reactor systems needed constant watching, hull checks happened daily, and fire systems needed testing and maintenance. These tasks kept damage control troopers working all the time, and when battles started, the workload became overwhelming. Therefore, damage control troopers rarely saw the battles they supported. They heard explosions and felt the ship shake while fighting fires as others fought the enemy. Victory and defeat happened somewhere else while they tried to keep their section running, and many never knew if their side won or lost before the end came. The disconnect from the larger battle made their sacrifice feel distant, even as the danger remained very real. These troopers served a clear purpose, even if it cost them everything. But other clones faced something worse than danger because they faced safety that destroyed the mind. Kamino was where all the clones came from, first shown in Attack of the Clones and explored further in the Clone Wars. The facilities on that ocean world made millions of soldiers, and some troopers returned there as training instructors for new cadets. This job had almost no physical danger because instructors stayed on Kamino, working in training rooms instead of battlefields. But that did not mean this job was easy. The harm was mental and not physical. Instructors trained their own replacements, and every cadet they taught would one day go to war, with many not surviving. The instructors knew the numbers and understood how many would be lost. As a result, they watched young clones grow up fast. The aging process was sped up, turning children into soldiers in a short time. Instructors taught them to follow orders without question, knowing full well what awaited them. On top of this, these jobs led nowhere because instructors rarely got promoted to command roles. The Republic saw them as trainers, not leaders, so they stayed on Kamino while their students went off to fight. On screen, the Kaminoans controlled every part of training, and instructors could not change the methods even when something seemed wrong. They followed orders and had no say in how cadets were treated. Each training cycle sent more soldiers into the war, and instructors who stayed long enough saw many groups come and go, making the factory-like nature of their existence impossible to ignore. Training instructors watched as others go to war, but some troopers sat inside weapons that could explode around them at any moment. On-screen battles in Revenge of the Sith reveal that Republic warships carried heavy weapons, and troopers served as gunners in turret stations where they fired at enemy fighters and missiles during space battles. The design of these stations created the danger because turrets sat on the outside of ships with thin armor, so the guns could aim in all directions. As a result, one hit could wipe out a whole crew, but that was only part of the problem. These troopers could not see or escape the threats they faced. Gunners sat in small rooms with screens, seeing only what their targeting system showed them. They could not look around like bridge officers or move like pilots. When their section came under attack, they had no way to know and no way to leave. A single bomber strike could end their lives instantly, and because of this, Republic leaders expected high losses among gunnery crews. Ships needed defensive fire that required troopers in exposed spots, so losses were accepted as part of the cost. Gunners served in some of the most dangerous spots on any ship, though at least their end came quickly, which brought less suffering than other jobs. Gunners faced enemies they could see on their screens, but other clones became walking targets simply because of who they were guarding. Across multiple Clone Wars episodes, the war produced prisoners, enemy officers, droids with secrets, and captured soldiers, all of whom needed secure transport. Troopers assigned to these jobs moved prisoners between bases and guarded holding cells, and this made them prime targets. Enemy forces attacked these assignments because of who the troopers protected. Separatist teams often tried to rescue important prisoners, so transports carrying them faced constant risk of ambush. Holding facilities had similar problems because enemy commando teams raided these places to free prisoners, and when elite soldiers attacked, guards were often outmatched. In addition, the Republic command saw these jobs as low priority, so when guards called for backup, they waited longer than troops in active battles. Their work was seen as less important, even though prisoners often held valuable secrets. The waiting between attacks created its own problem because guards spent long hours watching prisoners and doing routine tasks, which made them less alert, and sudden strikes caught them off guard. As a result, this cycle of boredom and sudden danger wore down mental strength over time. Guards cannot stay fully alert forever, yet they also could not relax, and this conflict took a heavy toll. Guard duty had walls and structure, but some assignments dropped soldiers into places where the planet itself wanted them dead. Clone Wars battles took place across many types of planets, and some were jungle worlds with thick plants, swamps, and dangerous wildlife. Troopers in jungle combat faced some of the hardest conditions of the war, but the droids were not the only threat. The enemy was not always the Separatists. Diseases and parasites took lives alongside enemy fire because jungle planets had sicknesses that Republic medicine could not always cure, and bugs, along with bad water, spread illness quickly. Strange plants released spores that caused breathing problems, while exhaustion grew as troopers pushed through thick terrain that fought back with every step. Seeing was hard in jungle areas because thick trees blocked sensors and eyes, so troopers could walk into traps without warning, and Separatist fighters used the land to hide, strike, and vanish before anyone could respond. The same terrain that concealed them also trapped Republic forces. Fighting in jungles proved especially hard since those who knew the land could escape forever, and troopers chased target for days without contact, then faced sudden attacks when tired. The information given to these units was often wrong, leading to wasted effort and more time exposed to jungle dangers. Standard armor did not work well in jungles either because the seal suits that protected troopers in space became problems in hot, wet places. Heat built up inside, water got into systems, and joints jammed with mud and plant matter, so troopers fought their own gear while fighting the enemy, and many stripped off pieces of armor just to keep moving. Medical help often came late or not at all, because getting sick troopers out of the thick jungle was hard. Landing zones were far away and paths through the trees were slow, so some lost their lives to infections that proper care could have fixed, proving that the jungle took lives as surely as enemy weapons did. Jungle fighting was brutal, but at least enemies stayed outside the camp, and city combat was different because any face in the crowd could be the enemy. Canon Sources confirmed that many battles happened in cities, and urban fighting brought challenges that open land did not. Troopers assigned to city combat fought through crowded areas where any building might hold enemies, regular people, or both. Clearing city blocks meant going through each building carefully because every room needed checking and every door might hide danger, making the work slow, constant, and mentally draining. And no matter how careful they were, mistakes happened. Harming regular citizens could not be avoided. In city fighting, troopers sometimes caused harm to people who were not soldiers. Some of these incidents were accidents, while others happened because enemies hid among crowds. Either way, troopers lived with the results of these events. City fighting was brutal, but at least troopers had their brothers beside them, and some assignments sent soldiers completely alone into enemy territory. Gathering information required troopers to go behind enemy lines, so long-range scout teams entered separatist space to watch enemy movements, find targets, and sometimes cause damage, putting small groups far from Republic help. Being alone for long periods defined this job because scout troopers worked for days or weeks without talking to friendly forces, carrying limited supplies, with the resupply being rare and risky. Each day behind enemy lines raised the chance of being found, and if they were, the outcome was grim. Being captured often meant a fate worse than quick defeat in battle. Separatist forces did not always end captured scouts quickly because questioning them might reveal secrets, so captured troopers face hard treatment before the end, and they were valuable until their information was taken. Rescue rarely came because getting scout teams out required resources the Republic often could not spare. Commanders weighed the cost against the value of trapped troopers, and most times they chose not to act. So scouts knew this and understood many missions would be one-way trips. Therefore, scout troopers worked in silence, watching without being able to act, and they gathered information to help other units while knowing they were on their own. Even after returning, troopers took their experiences with them because the time alone and the constant fear all left marks. Fitting back into regular units proved hard because scouts had learned to trust no one, and those habits stayed. Scout troopers could at least hide and wait, but other clones faced the exact opposite and stood in the open where enemy snipers could see them clearly. Republic guns and airstrikes needed someone to point them at targets, so forward observers went ahead of the main forces to find targets, call in strikes, and check the damage. Their job was key to Republic firepower, but it was also extremely dangerous, and that made them marked men. Observers became the first targets in any fight. Separatist units understood that stopping the trooper calling in strikes meant stopping the strikes, so ending observers became their first goal. Cover was limited because observers needed clear views of their targets, which meant open spots with little protection. The work demanded being seen, and being seen meant drawing fire. In addition, survival depended on getting out in time because observers finished their jobs and they had to leave before enemy forces reached them. That timing was often out of their hands, and if support was late or enemies moved fast, observers were left waiting for help that never came. The job demanded accuracy under extreme pressure because observers called in strikes while under fire and tracked targets while moving. The skill needs were high, but survival rates were low. Troopers who showed good accuracy stayed in the job because their skills were rare, which kept them in danger longer. The better they performed, the more missions they received. Observers faced danger during battle, but their work stopped when fighting stopped. And for some troopers, the real nightmare began only after the shooting ended. After the battles ended, someone had to gather the fallen. So troopers assigned to recovery work moved through battlefields, collecting those who did not survive and saving equipment. This work continued after fighting stopped, often while areas remained unsafe, and the physical danger was real. But that was not the worst part. The mental toll was constant and severe. Recovery troopers handled the remains of the fallen, moving bodies of troopers who had not made it, identifying them when possible, and preparing them for transport. Everyone was a brother, and every face was familiar because the genetic template meant recovery troopers saw their own features on those who had fallen. Major battles produced overwhelming work because thousands of troopers might be scattered across combat areas, and recovery teams worked through these scenes for days. The scale was hard to understand in any single event, but repeated exposure created wounds in the mind that never healed. Recovery work earned nothing in return because the troopers who did this job received no awards for bravery, and their work did not appear in battle reports. They were support workers, needed but unseen, and the Republic required their service while giving nothing back for its cost. In the end, they cleaned up after battles that other units fought. Their suffering was dismissed because their job was labeled non-combat, but the truth was far worse than that label suggested. Recovery troopers faced loss indirectly, but other clones faced the most powerful warriors in the galaxy and were responsible for keeping those warriors alive. Throughout the Clone Wars, Jedi generals led Republic forces, and troopers assigned to Jedi escort duty went with these commanders into battle, providing high security during high-risk missions. This job put troopers close to some of the most powerful people in the galaxy. That closeness came with significant costs because Jedi drew enemy attention. Separatist forces knew that removing Republic commanders would help their cause, so Jedi became priority targets, and troopers guarding them faced higher threat levels than regular infantry. Every mission with a Jedi present meant facing enemies who wanted that Jedi gone more than anything else. But the danger was not the only problem. Forming bonds was discouraged, but happened anyway. Troopers serving long terms with Jedi commanders form relationships because training against detachment could not stop bonds from growing during shared combat. They ate together, planned together, and survived battles together. When Jedi were lost, their guards felt it personally, but that grief was not accepted by military rules, which saw clone emotions as problems to be managed. Guard casualty rates were high because protecting a Jedi meant taking hits meant for that Jedi. The math was simple. Every threat stopped from reaching the Jedi landed somewhere else, usually on the trooper standing closest. This was expected and was the purpose of the assignment. In addition, survivors faced blame when their Jedi did not make it. Troopers who lived through those battles faced questions about their performance, and the thinking was that better work could have prevented the loss. This ignored the fact that some threats were beyond any trooper's ability to stop, including force users, heavy weapons, and overwhelming numbers. These connections created problems that the Republic's rules did not address, because when the Jedi made choices that put guards at risk, the troopers followed orders anyway, and when those choices led to trooper losses, the Jedi moved on to the next mission, showing the relationship was not equal. Jedi fought differently from what clone training taught because their abilities allowed moves that troopers could not copy. Guards protecting Jedi found themselves in situations their training never covered, and adapting required flexibility some troopers did not have. Those who could not adapt were lost, while protecting commanders whose tactics went beyond their skills. Jedi escort duty demanded loyalty that often led to loss, but some jobs asked something even harder because they required controlling people who hated them. The Clone Wars were not only about taking territory because the Republic also held ground after military wins. Troopers assigned to occupation duties stayed on freed worlds to keep Republic control and stop resistance movements. These jobs turned troopers from liberators into occupiers as local people who first welcomed Republic forces grew to resent their continued presence, and the line between freedom and control blurred quickly. The situation only got worse. Anger built over time. Long-term occupation created hostility because locals who worked with troopers faced punishment from resistance fighters, while locals who resisted faced action from the troopers. There was no safe middle ground, and every contact might turn into conflict. Troopers walked streets where they were not wanted, keeping order that served distant political goals while absorbing the anger of communities they had supposedly freed. Occupation forces held a compromised position because troopers were trained for combat, not governing. They were not peacemakers or office workers, and their tools were weapons. Applying combat skills to civilian crowds created problems that clashed with the stated mission of keeping peace. As a result, troopers on occupation duty did not pick their mission and followed orders that put them in impossible spots. Success meant keeping control, while failure meant resistance wins, and neither fixed the real problems. Occupation duty wore down troopers through endless tension, but other assignments went further because they used soldiers as test subjects. Legends lore from the Essential Guide to Warfare reveals the Republic military kept developing new weapons and equipment, and testing these systems needed live subjects. Troopers assigned to test units tried unstable gear under combat conditions, and the results were often brutal. High failure rates were expected. New weapons broke down, test armor failed under stress, and new systems acted unpredictably in the field. Troopers testing this gear took the results of design failures, and their injuries provided data that improved later versions. That was the clear purpose of their job. Safety limits were minimal because the test gear was shipped before full safety checks. The war's urgency meant promising tech moved to field testing before it was ready, so testers faced failures that proper development would have found and fixed. They paid for the Republic's rush with their bodies, and the Republic did not care. These troopers were treated as data points. Each failure taught designers something, and each success proved a concept. The troopers themselves were inputs to a process that made better gear for other units. So what happened to them mattered less than what their testing revealed. Test units faced danger from faulty equipment, but some troopers faced an assignment unlike any other because they defended the one place in the galaxy that meant everything to them. The canon episode ARC Troopers captures how Kamino made the Grand Army of the Republic, and the cloning facilities there were key to continued production. When Separatist forces attacked Kamino directly, troopers stationed there faced a unique form of combat, and this was not just another battle. They were defending their birthplace. The emotional toll of Kamino's defense was unlike any other job because troopers fought to protect the facilities where they and every other clone had been made. Enemy strikes on Kamino threatened not just military buildings, but the very place where the clone existence began. Combat on Kamino showed troopers sights no other job produced as cadets fell during attacks. The buildings that made troopers become battlegrounds where defenders witnessed the next generation meet their end before ever becoming soldiers. For those who survived, the impact was profound. The trauma went deeper than any wound. Troopers had seen their own creation process threatened, fought in the halls where their own training had happened, and faced an enemy targeting everything that made them who they were. The strategic value of Kamino meant defense was required no matter the cost. So troopers there could not retreat because the facilities could not be replaced, even though the troopers defending them could. Defending Kamino was brutal, but other clones fought a shadow war where they could never speak about what they had done. The Clone Wars also included hidden warfare, as separatist cells worked inside Republic territory, causing damage, removing targets, and spreading fear. Troopers assigned to counter these cells hunted them through raids and targeted strikes, and the rules of engagement were different here. These missions offered no surrender. Countercell missions did not take prisoners because trooper units raided enemy hideouts with orders to end threats, not capture them. And enemy fighters in these missions fought to the end because surrender was not offered. This work was classified, and troopers who did these jobs could not talk about what they had done. But the hidden nature of the work was not the worst part. Extreme moral confusion marked every mission. Counter-cell units ended targets based on information that was sometimes incomplete. So mistakes happened, and innocent people fell when the intelligence was wrong. Troopers lived with those errors without any way to make things right because the secret nature of their work meant mistakes could not be admitted, studied, or learned from. The mix of violence, silence, and ethical burden made countercell work one of the most damaging jobs available. Troopers in these units face constant exposure to ending lives without any structure that regular combat provided. Countercell work wore down soldiers over time. But what comes next is not a job at all because it was a single battle that changed every clone who survived it. In Attack of the Clones, Geonosis marked the first large deployment of the Grand Army. The battle that started the Clone Wars happened in that arena and desert of that world, and troopers who survived Geonosis carried that experience for the rest of the war. Nothing in their training had prepared them for what they had faced. Overwhelming enemy numbers defined the battle. The first fight at Geonosis threw new troopers against massive droid forces, and these soldiers had never seen real combat, yet their first battle was one of the biggest of the entire war. The scale of conflict went beyond anything they had expected, with thousands of droids filling the desert, artillery fire covering the sky, and Geonosian fighters attacking from above. Loss rates at Geonosis were severe because the Republic won, but the cost in trooper lives was enormous as survivors saw their brothers fall in numbers that normal military action never produced. The sand turned dark with the fallen, and those who lived through it were never the same. Survivors were marked forever. Troopers who survived Geonosis faced the rest of the war with that battle as their starting point, and every later fight was measured against their first mission. Some became hardened veterans who could handle anything, while others developed conditions that hurt their ability to function normally. All of them held Geonosis inside them until the war ended. The Republic saw these veterans as proven soldiers, and having lived through the worst, they were thought reliable for hard jobs, so Command kept sending them into difficult situations. This view ignored the hidden damage they carried because the Republic valued their experience while overlooking its cost. The first battle set patterns that repeated throughout the war because troopers learned there that Republic Command would accept massive losses to reach goals, and they took this lesson to heart. They understood that their lives were spent on their commander's plans, and this knowledge changed how they saw every mission that followed. Those who fought at Geonosis became different soldiers from troopers made later because the shared experience created bonds that training alone could not make. Troopers who had never seen combat served next to veterans who held weight from intense conflict, and the gap between these groups created problems within units throughout the war. Veterans struggled to relate to soldiers who had not been there, and new troopers could not understand what the veterans had seen. Geonosis survivors faced the horror of battle against the enemy, but one assignment was darker than all of these because it required troopers to hunt down and end their own brothers. In Legends continuity, Karen Travis's Republic Commando novels reveal the Grand Army included units that policed its own members, and troopers assigned to internal suppression removed deserters, those who left without permission, and threats to military order. This was the darkest assignment any clone could receive. They ended fellow clones. This job was completely different from fighting separatists because suppression units targeted those who had fled or refused orders. Every target had the same face, and every action was against their own kind, and the Republic made sure no one ever knew. Total secrecy surrounded these operations. Suppression work was never admitted because troopers in these units worked under a complete information blackout, unable to discuss their work with anyone. They got orders, carried them out, and returned with no record of their actions. And this silence was needed because public knowledge would have damaged trust in the army. There was no acknowledgement for this work because troopers who hunted their brothers received nothing for it. Their actions were erased, their service was denied, and they endured the weight alone. The toll of suppression duty was unique because other jobs meant fighting the enemy, but this job meant fighting family. That difference mattered to the troopers who did this work, even if Republic Command pretended otherwise. Suppression units acted against their own by order, but one assignment removed even the illusion of choice. Order 66, as depicted in Revenge of the Sith, was a command built into every clone trooper. When activated, it required the immediate removal of Jedi commanders by the forces serving under them, and the troopers across the galaxy received this order and carried it out. They had no choice in the matter, and that was by design. Forced betrayal was the method. Troopers who carried out Order 66 ended commanders they had served alongside throughout the war, and some of those bonds had lasted years. The clones had followed Jedi into battle, protected them, and fought beside them through countless missions. Yet Order 66 required them to turn on these same people. The inhibitor chip technology forced obedience because troopers did not choose to follow Order 66. Brain programming overrode their judgment and relationships, and they became tools of removal because their minds gave them no other option. But for some, the nightmare did not end there. Lasting guilt followed for those who regained awareness. Some troopers kept or regained awareness of what they had done after Order 66. The chip control was not permanent for all, so troopers who understood they had ended trusted commanders carried that knowledge for the rest of their lives. The guilt could not be escaped because the actions could not be undone. Order 66 executors hold a unique place in this ranking because their physical risk during the events varied. But their inner suffering was universal, and what happened in that moment could never be reversed. Order 66 took away trooper choices, but one assignment took away something even more basic. Legend sources, including the Republic Commando novels and the Essential Guide to Warfare, document how the Republic tried enhanced clone types. Experimental commandos got genetic changes, chemical boosts, and special training to make better soldiers, and these programs pushed clone bodies beyond normal limits. The upgrades came at a terrible price. Extreme changes brought extreme costs. Enhanced commandos had shorter lives because the changes that improved their combat abilities sped up body breakdown. These troopers were made to perform better and end faster, so their improved abilities came with built-in time limits that standard clones did not face. Ultra-risky missions were standard for experimental commandos because the investments in their upgrades meant the Republic Command sent them to jobs where those upgrades were needed, and those jobs were always the most dangerous available. But the missions were not the worst part. These troopers were treated as equipment, not as people. The Republic military structure listed them as gear, and their changes made them valuable. But that value was measured against mission needs, not their own health or safety. When experimental commandos failed, they were dropped, and the program moved to the next version, while failed subjects were left behind. The mix of shorter lives and extreme missions placed experimental commandos at number 2. And their entire existence was defined by use from creation to end. Experimental commandos were changed to end faster, but they were still seen as valuable. The worst job in the Grand Army offered no such status. These troopers were created to be thrown away. The Essential Guide to Warfare, a key Legends reference, describes the worst job a clone trooper could get, and it's the first wave assault. Shock troopers picked for first landing missions served one purpose. It's to draw enemy fire so other units could advance. Their sacrifice was the method by which other units survived. The numbers prove it. This was the highest lost job in the Grand Army. First wave shock troopers landed on hostile worlds before defenses were weakened, meeting entrenched enemy forces at full strength. Their assault gave targeting data for heavy weapons and air support, and their losses showed where enemies were. They created conditions for successful invasion as the first boots on the ground, facing the full fury of planetary defenses. And to the Republic Command, they were not soldiers, but numbers, and the planning reflected that. Zero individuality existed in shock trooper thinking. These troopers were not seen as individuals in any real sense, but were counted the same way as spent ammunition. And Republic planners calculated how many shock troopers an assault would need based on expected losses, not careful use. A certain percentage would not make it, and that percentage was built into the plan. Fast replacement cycles kept shock troopers always available because when first wave units were lost, replacement units were already coming. The supply line of clone production on Kamino fed directly into shock trooper groups. So the Grand Army used these soldiers faster than any other type and replaced them without pause. There was never a shortage and never a delay, and when they fell, there was nothing to mark their service. There was no memory and no honor for shock troopers. They existed to be used up, and when they were gone, new troopers filled their places to meet the same fate in the next assault. The cycle was mechanical, and the outcome was certain because no memorials were built, no names were recorded, and the Grand Army simply moved on. The Republic won the Clone Wars through this system. Every victory was built on shock trooper losses. Every planetary liberation began with the first wave soldiers giving their lives to create openings for later forces. The strategic success of the Republic military depended on its willingness to sacrifice at this scale. The Grand Army of the Republic was a military machine built from people, and troopers filled every role that machine needed. From office jobs to frontline service, some were lost quickly, while others were lost slowly, and some survived while building invisible wounds that no medical system could fix. The Republic needed all of them, used all of them, and replaced all of them when they failed. Job assignment decided fate, and luck of assignment meant the difference between surviving the war and not surviving the first battle. The 20 worst jobs for a clone trooper were not mistakes, but were built into a military system that valued results over individual survival. The clones asked for none of this. They were born into service, trained for service, and lived and died in service. For many, the only choice they ever had was how they faced what the Republic demanded of them. The clones served the Jedi, but the Jedi Order had its own rigid rules about who could join their ranks. Entire species across the galaxy were never considered for training, and the reasons reveal a darker side of Jedi philosophy. Meanwhile, thousands of years before the Clone Wars, the Sith had their own traditions that modern fans might find surprising. The ancient Sith lords who built the dark side's foundation rarely carried the weapon we associate with them today, and their reasons changed everything about how the Sith fought their wars. Both of these stories are available right now on our channel.